Hey gang, this is Mr. Rob. If you're watching this, this is my safety in the classroom presentation, which was done on Thursday and Friday at school in my 440 and 442 classes, 440 being ACC, 442 being honors. If at any time as you watch this you need to get a better read, please feel free to pause and read the sections. I'm going to go through this quickly to keep the size down. Here we go. So, briefly, the history of safety in the United States best could be described prior to 1970 as poor. You'll notice there in bold in the middle of the page. An estimated 14,000 workers were killed on the job in that year. Works out to about 38 every day. Congress and President Nixon signed the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. That was the law that created OSHA, or Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Now, OSHA, they were charged with basically making it so that it is clear the right to a safe workplace is a basic human right. And all this information comes right from the OSHA website. So OSHA, this brand new federal agency that was created in order to make workplaces safe, decided that their philosophy would include a three-layered approach. And these three layers are engineering controls, administrative controls, and personal protective equipment. And these controls will be rolled out and we'll see how they're applied here shortly. All three of these layers are considered part of a larger picture. And while no single control can offer the protection that the combination can, all three together do not completely eliminate the possibility of injury. Observation and environmental review is always part of any safety plan. In other words, use your eyes, use your ears. Look, listen, feel. Is something not right? Is there something going on around you that could possibly interfere or cause a hazard to exist which you had no idea existed prior to the beginning of this exercise? All right, so let's look at each one of these controls and at least identify what we can see when we get to the lab. All right, so the first, engineering controls. Anytime you see this, I want you to think built-in protection. Examples of this include selection of less toxic chemicals. We won't be dealing too many chemicals in our labs, but be aware that we may. There will be hazardous chemical containers with anti-spill nozzles. Some of you may have seen this even with gasoline cans. There's sort of the anti-spill, the nozzle that extends from the can. While we don't use many pieces of equipment that create noise exposure, you can place sound dampening materials around it to reduce exposure. Radiation shielding. The dental technician who takes your x-rays walks out of the room to take advantage of the built-in protection that cinder blocks and concrete walls provide to stop radiation. While it's okay for an individual to receive one dose of radiation, that technician's exposed to 10, 15, 20, who knows how many times a day. They need to be protected from that hazard, and they utilize the built-in protection of walls as part of their engineering control plan. Moving on. Administrative controls. When you see this, I want you to think procedures and practices to follow. This includes housekeeping and maintaining the work area clear of clutter and debris. And you may ask yourself why. Well, the single largest number of accidents which are reported to OSHA on a yearly basis for many years have been slips, trips, and falls. And these occur because people did not see something in the walkway. People were not aware that there was water on the floor. People may have inadvertently stepped off of a stair or off of a walkway into an open area and fallen. We do not want any of these to happen in our labs, so we keep our work area clear, especially the floor. When we're working on the floor, we're working outside in the hallways. Everything must be kept clear of clutter and debris. Also, we will have the opportunity to place caution tape, establish barriers, have warning people, guards posted whenever we are doing our work in the hallways. The last layer is personal protective equipment. PPE, for short, is something that is worn by the person, and it is usually unfortunately, the least effective at presenting exposure to a hazard. Things like hard hats, gloves, and eye protection solely by themselves, they are nearly as effective if they are by themselves. If you were to include engineering and administrative controls in addition to PPE, the level of protection goes way up. You don't want to use your hard hat to prevent you from being hit in the head by falling objects. What you really want is that the individual or individuals working above you followed proper housekeeping procedures and didn't let objects lie on a walkway that could fall down on you. You want them to use tie-offs and chains to prevent objects from falling in the first place. Hard hats, for example, are only rated for small objects. You do not want a wrench falling on your head and hitting a hard hat. The hard hat will not provide enough protection. Ideally, that proves also the case for gloves. You don't want gloves to be the only protection. If you're dealing with something very hot, use metal tongs instead of just grabbing a hot container with gloves. Moving on. So these three layers are a philosophy or a general application. Now, these have to be rolled out or applied to each large general industry category. OSHA has defined high school laboratories as being part of the General Science Lab specifications or specs. And these general lab specs include: note, engineering controls, safe ingress and egress, in other words, a safe way in and out of the room. There will be utility controls, cutoff switches for things like gas, water, electric. There will be available eye washers and showers in the event of using chemicals. Things like safety shields, fire suppression, fire blankets, fire extinguishers, eye protection, electric shock preventions. All of these will be available. Prudent work practices, aka administrative controls, must address things like no horseplay in the lab, how we deal with things that could be excessively hot or cold, how we get out of the room in the event of an evacuation, how we deal with things like first aid, broken glass. All loose clothing and long hair must be secured. There are no food, drink, or cosmetics permitted in our science laboratories when we are doing work. Also, sharps, things like scissors. If they're on a lab table and they get knocked off and you're not wearing closed-toe shoes, it'll ruin your day. Moving on. General lab specs continue. We're now talking about personal protective equipment. This must be available and aware to all occupants in the science lab. Must be appropriate for the hazards. Things like eye, foot, clothing, and gloves. All of these things, all of these protections must be applied. Note there the Z87.1 ANSI standard, or ANSI, American National Standards Institute. They provide the tests that certify the eye protection will do what OSHA needs it to do. Foot protection. We only need closed-toe shoes or better. If you choose to wear boots or steel-toe boots, that's fine. They're not required. But open-toed shoes like sandals or flops, unacceptable on lab days. We won't be using anything that will require aprons, but certainly when we deal with rope, when we do our power exercise out in the hall, I will provide you with gloves to prevent you from rope burns. All of these things, personal protective equipment. The third layer in 3 layers, which are applied to mitigate hazards. Let's review. OSHA, which was created, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, created by law by Congress and then President Richard Nixon. It's a federal agency charged with establishing rules to keep workers safe. OSHA developed a 3-layered approach governing most situations, and these are engineering controls, administrative controls, and PPE. Standards to address hazards exist for many different industrial categories. The industrial category applying to our science labs are set forth in OSHA's General Science Laboratory Specifications section. Whenever you're working in a lab or other lab activity, you must adhere to the rules and safety procedures for that exercise. Otherwise, failure to do so may result in an unnecessary and unneeded exposure to injury, hazard, or, God forbid, worse. Please take a moment to review any of these slides. The quiz that will be issued on this lesson will cover not the history, but it will cover the 3 layers, and I will expect you to be able to be aware enough that if you were presented with a situation, you would say, the engineering control should have been, the administrative control could have been, PPE like this may have been appropriate. Okay, thanks, and I'll see you back in class.